All right, so we're back for scene 3. Government Well. Magpies are caroling. Magpies we hear about at the end again. Sissy's preparing damper, so she's making some bread. And Jo and David are playing 2 Up. This is a game with normally 2 coins. It's a gambling game, illegal in Australia except for Anzac Day for sort of tradition, heritage purposes. But anyway, the boys are playing regardless. Now the family gets ready for their food and Sissy calls them over to put it onto the fire. They have to help her. Jimmy walks in. He's mad because, of course, he's found out about the soap. Wait till I see him tomorrow. I'll give him no soap. No soap in their rations. Now, Sam and Frank follow Jimmy. The men are slightly drunk. This is really interesting because we see Frank interacting with the family. The men are drunk because, well, Sam and Jimmy have got the alcohol from Frank. They couldn't have bought it themselves. In come Gran and Millie. David's after some lollies from Gran, but she hasn't got them. No lollies, but not even soap. Now, Jo indicating Frank, so pointing towards Frank, but who's he? He's chosen to talk to the family in the Nyunga language, not English. Now, the family, you can see, normally talk to each other in English, but he doesn't want Frank to understand him. Who's that? He's scared. He's weary of the stranger who he's not used to being around. But Jimmy responds with, he's our mate, so he's our friend. We trust him. So Sam wants to show the family that he's proud of his kids, Jo, Sissy and David. Frank says hello. The children don't reply. Now that's rude, but I suspect it comes from a place of fear. They're not used to talking to non-Indigenous men. Now Sissy wants to wash her hair, but she can't. They don't get any soap in the rations anymore. And Gran looks into the oven over the fire to see there's no onions and taters, so no potatoes. So the family's not going to have a great dinner. It's essentially just flour made into bread. Gran has a solution for the soap though. Don't worry, we can use Chirang bush. Chirang bush would be the traditional soap. The plant that is soap-like. She knows where there's some. So Gran can solve these problems. No, she does her best to solve the problems anyway. And Jimmy reckons, I'll give him a piece of my mind. I'm going to go in there and tell the sergeant who's boss. Well, Gran responds that he'll give you 6 months. You'll go to jail if you do that. So Jimmy keeps drinking. David, very proud of his bike. That's important because it's about to get trashed. Now, Gran finds some of the potatoes and onions, I guess, from her rations. Jimmy produces turnips, more vegetables. He's got vegetables in his pocket. Where would Jimmy have got these vegetables from? Hence Millie asking, where'd you get them from? Well, he never growed them, and I bet he never bought them. Jo saying he didn't grow them. They're not his vegetables from a garden, and he didn't buy them. So he's stolen them, obviously. But the family needs to eat, so they add them to the stew. Jimmy has a mouth organ about to become very annoying. So Jimmy says to him, you've been inside? Frank doesn't understand what he means by inside. Inside what? Like, you've been to, jail. You've been in Freo. Well, no, he hasn't. He's not like the Indigenous people who get put in jail often. And Gran reckons he'll go to jail if the sergeant sees him there. And you know what? He's probably not wrong. Now, they talk about their being in jail that Jimmy's been in 4 times for drinking, for fighting. Snowdropping is stealing clothes from washing lines, no doubt because the family needed the clothes. And Jimmy talks about how when he was younger he used to be a choir boy at New Norcia. Show you that on a map in a minute. That he was a good church boy. And he's quite proud of it. as is Millie, that Jimmy used to sing Ave Maria. And Sam says, well, that's where I met her, that they got married, Sam and Millie, in New Norcia in the church. Very proud. Jimmy makes a joke that they're engaged on a government blanket. It's a rather crude joke, shall we say, at his brother-in-law and sister's expense. And Millie doesn't appreciate that reference, so be quiet. There's a white fella here. Come on. But, Jimmy's drunk. So he plays some music for us. David brings back that bike that he's been working on, and they get ready for dinner. David's bike, which he fixed up, is now broken because he ended up down the hill into the rubbish dump. So Sam asks Frank if he's had the food before, and Frank says, yeah, sure, Damper, I've had that lots, but not cooked like this, and not underground mutton. Mutton being sheep. They call the rabbit underground mutton to make it sound a bit fancier. And Frank says, well, he has. So we hear about Frank. Frank tells a story about having his own farm and how he lost it. That the rabbits came in eating his crops and they had bad seasons of growing. And then the bank, who he would have had a mortgage with, claimed his farm back. Now, Jimmy, drunker, is not happy with the government, but he asks Frank, you allowed to walk down the street after sundown? When it's dark, can you go down the street? Frank, yeah, I don't see why not. Why would I not be allowed to do that? And Jimmy points out, well, I'm not. There's a curfew. And Jimmy and his family aren't allowed down the street. If they are, they get arrested. They're not allowed to go to the soak, so that's where they get the water. They're not allowed to march, so to have a protest, or they'll get handcuffs. They'll be in jail. They can shoot the dogs. These things Frank doesn't know about. They shot Streak, who was one of their dogs. Now, talks to Millie about Frank's family, his married, children, and Millie has some sympathy about that they're in Perth and he can't be there. So Jimmy pulls his wallet out, shows them the photos of the kids. Frank's pretty proud. Now, we heard about how Sam met Millie, but Frank met his wife, at a dancing competition. Oh, Box, go away. That worked well, didn't it? They danced the Charleston, so a dance, at the Lux, a dance hall in Perth. That's certainly nothing like the way these Indigenous people are living. It's been 6 months since he's seen it and he hasn't got any money. Now Jimmy comes back and falls over the bike and kicks it. He's ruining David's bike. And Sam and Jimmy, in the messing about, end up wrestling. Jimmy swings an ineffectual punch. So he tries to punch him, but it's not effective because, well, he's drunk. So they have a brawl. They roll around on the ground and have a little bit of a fight. And that's Frank's cue to go home. So she does. And thanks for the meal. Frank is, well, probably pleased to have a good meal, to be honest. They have a go about Jack Johnson and Jack Dempsey, these boxers, teasing one another. And Millie picks up the wine bottle. It's real fighting stuff, eh? It's real fighting stuff. The alcohol makes them fight, so she pours it to the ground. Millie doesn't want the alcohol around for her family. So Jimmy and Sam end up in the police station, the lockup being the cells. They're in 2 separate cells, and the sergeant and constable are getting the things from their pockets, so the possessions that they own, and putting them in bags. We hear the list of things they have, and Sergeant reckons that the alcohol's come from that bloke camped down the goods yard. So Frank. I'll check with publicans, so the people who own the pub, who would have sold Frank the alcohol, and pick him up in the morning. Now, Jimmy's playing on his mouth organ again, but they've already taken one mouth organ off him up here. So Jimmy's got two. It's quite annoying for everybody else except Jimmy. So they go and get the other one. Now you can read this two ways. You can see the police officers as being aggressive and angry and attacking Jimmy and Sam. Or you can see them as frustrated and Jimmy is being the aggressor. It's up to you how you read the scene. So, give me that instrument. This ain't an instrument. It's a mouth organ. So, obviously, it's an instrument. But Jimmy's not playing. So, he hands it over. Well, after Sam tells him to, because Sam is the one who's more likely to follow authority and try and stay out of trouble. Jimmy wants to stand up for himself. So, Jimmy calls the sergeant back. He gets the constable, though. Tell your boss the Kump bucket's got a hole in it. So the bucket they're using is a toilet. The constable calls out the bucket's got a hole, but blaming Jimmy for not being able to so-called aim straight, not get into the bucket. So this means Jimmy starts talking about being accurate with a gun, which is a problem when he says that he could blow the sergeant's head off with a .303, so a gun, at 600 feet. Why would you threaten to blow off the sergeant's head with a gun? Frustration, drunkenness, I don't know. Sam realizes it's a bad idea, but Jimmy continues. He gets angrier and he throws the toilet bucket against the wall. That's going to make a mess. It's also going to damage the bucket. So that's damage to government property. Then they add that to his charge sheet. That is the list of things that Jimmy's been charged with. Drunkenness, whatnot. Now they add to it damaging the government's property. So Jimmy sings a song in English, a hymn. So a church song. Probably really annoying. Well, yeah, really annoying. Sings now some more country songs, and Jimmy reckons I can do 6 months on me fucking head. I don't go to jail, it's fine. I don't care. Singing songs about how much he loves his mom and just being annoying. I seen that talking picture, so he's heard this song in a movie at the theatre, but he had to sit in the special roped off section for blackfellas. So a section with a rope around it for the Indigenous people, so they don't sit in the non-Indigenous people section, where he sees Al Jolson. Al Jolson was an actor, non-Indigenous, white skin, who painted his face black and pretended to be an African American. That's offensive to Jimmy, for good reason. But Jimmy thought, have you been out at least to see my family? Well, no, they haven't. So, Jimmy's stuck with his fate there. They end up at court, and I think we should see this straight away afterwards. The JP, the Justice of the Peace, he is like he is like a judge, I suppose, but he's not there all the time. It's part of his job. He's like an informal justice. And he's in a hurry. What have we got? Not much? Good, I'm in a hurry. He wants to go. He needs to go to an auction to try and buy some farm equipment. 2 natives, 1 supplying. He doesn't say we have 2 cases of robbery or whatnot, just 2 natives. That's Sam and Jimmy. And 1 supplying. That's Frank's charge of supplying them with alcohol. So we call Francis James Brown. In comes Frank. Notice how Frank acts in the courtroom. Now, Monday and what's his name? So he doesn't even know Sam's surname, Millimora. Natives within the meaning of the Aborigines Act, meaning are they legally Indigenous people? Yes, sir. Right. So he asks for Frank's plea, and Frank pleads guilty with an explanation. So I did it, but I can explain. So the JP's not really up for hearing it, but all right. I arrived in Northam a few days ago and I was broke, didn't even to eat for 2 days, and I ran into Jimmy in the park and JP doesn't know who Jimmy is, but anyway, I ran into Jimmy. So Frank's had a rough time. And look, Jimmy helped me out. He took me to his home and gave me a meal. The JP doesn't like that Frank called it Jimmy's home because it's a camp. And he doesn't think of it as being Jimmy's home. Jimmy doesn't get a home because he's Aboriginal. And Frank talks about being given his first meal in 2 days, and the JP doesn't care. Well, Frank goes on, Jimmy gave him his razor to shave his face. And then, after the kindness, when Jimmy asked me to pick up a bottle of wine for him, I felt obliged to do it. I felt I had to do it. So he did it, but this is why. He points out that he's an ex-serviceman, so he used to be in the army. He's probably served in World War I. That gives him some credit. JP doesn't have a lot of sympathy. I would highlight this in your text. It's my duty to protect natives and half-castes from alcohol. Protect them. Natives, so Indigenous people and people who have one Indigenous parent, from alcohol. It's my duty to protect them. They can't protect themselves. They need me. So I give you 6 weeks in jail with labour. That's not pleasant. Frank has to go to jail for 6 weeks working hard. But let's compare that to what the other two get. So the sergeant calls out Sam and Jimmy, but they don't appear. In comes Sam, but Jimmy's not here. Jimmy walks in, tying a bit of binder twine around his trousers. Binder twine is the string that you use to tie together hay. It's string. And Jimmy's tying it as a belt. He doesn't have a belt. He's tying it as he comes into the court. Now, it might look like Jimmy's got no manners, but it's difficult to have the manners when this isn't your culture. It's like sending you to a completely foreign culture and knowing how to behave at a ceremony. So Jimmy says, "Sorry, sir, I was on the shit bucket, toilet, got a guts ache, sir." Jimmy appears to have some kind of problem. He needed to go to the toilet and he just told them. He doesn't realise this language isn't appropriate. Or at least he probably doesn't. So the sergeant says what happens. They both got drunk and then Jimmy damaged the toilet bucket and then threatened to blow my head off. Well, is that what he did or was he just sort of joking? Who knows? So Jimmy wants to talk, but he doesn't understand that he needs to wait and he gets to talk second. It doesn't seem fair that the sergeant is talking and saying things wrong. But of course, this isn't Jimmy's legal system. So Sam, however, shuts up. Yes, sir. Sam is willing to play the game to try and reduce his suffering now. So we hear that Monday is Jimmy, has several previous convictions, and Millimara, so that's Sam, only has the one. Are they related? Sam says he's my Nulia, sir. That means brother-in-law, but he uses the Nyunga word. JP doesn't understand, so the sergeant has to translate. Now, while they're still explaining, and keeping in mind he hasn't given Jimmy that chance to speak that he said he was going to, he hands out the sentence. 6 offence, that's it, you got 14 days, now you get 3 months imprisonment with hard labour. So Frank got 6 weeks Jimmy got 3 months, both with hard labour, and Sam got a fine. He doesn't have to go to jail. It's Sam's second offence, but 25 shillings plus the cost of running the court is a huge amount of money for Sam. Where's he going to get that money from? 14 days to pay it? Well, he doesn't really have that kind of time. I think we'll pause there for that, and then we'll come on to the next scene in a minute.